Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, FPAN and our partners for organizing this event, and thank you to our audience for participating in this summit. Just a quick background, I'm a National Park Service archaeologist since 1991. Many of my colleagues and myself have been concerned with climate change and sea level rise for decades. Scientists and science have been informing us and warning us about these changes. We are now seeing undeniable evidence of the consequences of global warming and the impact to natural and cultural resources, especially to archaeological sites. This is a crisis of epic proportions, and we must act now to plan, adapt, and mitigate for impacts. The National Park Service celebrates its 100th year this summer. Happy birthday, National Park Service. Our enabling legislation states that our purpose is to conserve natural and historic objects and leave them unimpaired for future generations. At our 100th year anniversary, we face the biggest challenge in our history. As National Park Service Director John Jarvis says, quote, "I believe climate change is fundamentally the greatest threat to the integrity of our national parks that we have ever experienced." With 68 parks in the Southeast region, thousands of miles of coastline, and many thousands of threatened sites, the reality is we simply won't be able to protect and preserve all of our resources in the face of climate change. We're essentially looking at a triage situation. So what are we to do? As National Park Service Director John Jarvis says, climate change poses an especially acute problem for managing cultural resources because they are unique and irreplaceable. Once lost, they are lost forever. If moved or altered, they lose aspects of their significance and meaning. Since we can't stop sea level rise, we can't move archaeological sites, and we can't excavate entire sites. We need an adaptation strategy. The following presents a case study on the challenges and solutions to protecting eroding shell mound sites in Canaveral National Seashore. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of prehistoric shell middens and mounds throughout coastal Florida. These are essentially garbage dumps of food remains, discarded bits of pottery, and other artifacts of daily life. So why should we care about preserving ancient garbage piles? Shell middens are incredible sources of data, a footprint of where and when people lived in the past. They provide evidence of food, tools, and social and economic activities. They record the past environment, and they reflect how people modified landscapes. Some shell middens were also formed into shell mounds, which had social, symbolic, ceremonial, and monumental importance. In some areas, like the 10,000 Islands of the Everglades, entire islands were constructed out of shell, with complex shellwork features and socially constructed landscapes that link related communities. Shell middens and mounds are also important paleo-ecological archives. They provide proxy data for paleo-climate and reconstructing past environmental conditions and change. These in turn inform science by contributing to our understanding of past ecosystem dynamics, structure, and change. Turning now to Canaveral National Seashore, located in Volusia County, it contains one of the most productive estuaries in the east coast of Florida. It was home to coastal hunter-fisher-gatherers for some 4,000 years, as evidenced by hundreds of shell middens and mounds. Unfortunately, the systematic mining and destruction of shell mounds for road fill in the early 20th century destroyed an estimated 85% of shell mounds in the region, making the remaining shell sites all that more important to preserve. Fortunately, Canaveral National Seashore protects 4 of the largest extant shell mounds in the region: Turtle Mound, Castle Windy, Seminole Rest, and Ross Hammock. Though all 4 mound sites are listed on the National Register of Historic Places, not much is known about these mounds, and they are now ground zero for impacts from climate change and sea level rise. All sites are showing signs of erosion and continue to be threatened with damage and future site loss. This case study focuses on National Park Service efforts to evaluate climate change impacts and implement an adaptation and mitigation strategy to recover data through archaeology in advance of site loss, to document sites, and provide protection measures. This includes an active public archaeology program that encourages volunteerism, civic engagement, and educational outreach to school groups at all levels of this project. Turtle Mound is the tallest extant shell mound in the National Park Service and one of the 2 tallest shell mounds in North America. At 38 feet tall, it is a prominent landmark on maps from the early 1600s and was used as a navigational landmark by early explorers to Florida. Severe erosion is occurring to the northwest face of Turtle Mound. Though Turtle Mound is listed on the National Register, prior to the study, not much was known about the mound. Some attribute the mound to the Soroke Indians, and it may have served as a territorial marker or used for whale scouting. It is estimated that 2.5 million bushels of oysters make up the mound. In order to document and monitor erosion, it was important to first document the spatial extent of the site. In a partnership with the University of South Florida, we used airborne and terrestrial LiDAR to map Turtle Mound, creating this digital elevation model. This image details the erosion occurring on Turtle Mound's northwest face and also clearly depicts the site as 2 conjoined mounds with a north and south summit. It is estimated that 5 to 7 meters of the mound have already been lost to erosion. Archaeological investigation included 9 units, 33 radiocarbon dates, column sampling, and specialized studies in soils, ceramics, paleo-ecological, and zooarchaeological studies. Excavations determined that Turtle Mound's north and south summits were constructed from about AD 860 to 1540 and contained alternating layers of oyster shell, black soil, and very dense faunal midden. At 38 feet tall, or 11.5 meters in height, it is one of the tallest shell mounds in North America. The detailed LiDAR mapping, archaeological survey, and testing determined that Turtle Mound is part of a larger regional settlement that includes many additional smaller mounds. Turtle Mound may have been a chiefly or ceremonial center. The Castle Windy site is another large shell mound with evidence of severe erosion. Ripley Bullen excavated the site in the 1950s, and it was the first site in Florida to be radiocarbon dated. Previous to our investigation, this was the most accurate base map of the Castle Windy site, which is far from detailed and accurate. Using airborne and terrestrial LiDAR, a highly accurate digital elevation model of the site was created. This DEM shows the extent of erosion to the south site's west-facing edge. Archaeological investigation included 8 excavation units, 9 column samples, specialized analysis, and 20 new radiocarbon dates, dating the site from AD 1040 to 1450. Castle Windy's internal mound profiles showed immense deposits of coquina shell, suggesting that the prehistoric mound builders feasted on these tiny swash-riding surf clams. These shells are present on beaches today, but not in the density seen at Castle Windy, suggesting past ecological change. Temporally, the radiocarbon-dated zones of coquina fall within AD 1220 to 1450, fully within the Little Ice Age climactic interval, which may have led to regressing sea levels and cooler and drier climates. Another possible indicator of paleo-climate change comes from the presence of boreal and subarctic bird remains from Castle Windy, a humerus of the extinct great auk, a large flightless bird, and the remains of razorbill exhibiting cut marks suggesting human intentionality were recovered. Bullen's excavations at Castle Windy in 1956 also produced remains of auk and the common murre. The common murre is another member of the auk family and resides predominantly in boreal and low Arctic waters. The presence of these cold water birds, as well as the very dense lenses of coquina clam at Castle Windy, may suggest a climactic anomaly or a sea surface temperature anomaly at the time of their deposition. The Castle Windy bird and coquina remains are associated with radiocarbon dates around AD 1300, which corresponds to the onset of the Little Ice Age. Phase 2 of this project was designed to address erosion to sites by implementing stabilization and protection measures. An integral component to this phase of the project was in identifying partners who could leverage additional resources and funding and engage stakeholders and the public to support this work. In 2011, we teamed up with Dr. Linda Walters, University of Central Florida, who was doing oyster bed restoration in Mosquito Lagoon. We approached her to see if we could combine forces and target threatened archaeological sites with building living shorelines in front of them. While this will not stop sea level rise, it will provide a natural buffer against wave energy and build resiliency in the ecosystem by restoring native plants and shellfish. We looked at past examples of stabilization efforts, such as this seawall built by the state of Florida in the 1970s to curtail erosion at Turtle Mound. This is called hard armoring, and while it provides some physical stabilization, hard armoring is falling out of favor because it is impermanent. It will eventually fail and will need to be replaced, possibly causing more damage to the site. It also creates an impervious barrier to natural water flow, vegetation, growth, and to animals. Instead, we employed soft stabilization methods, which restores native habitat and protects sites by establishing a living shoreline. For each site stabilized, test plots were deployed and studied for 6 to 9 months to determine what combination of plants and oyster mats worked best at each location. After each site location was studied, the arduous and long permitting process began. Raw materials included oysters tied to marine-grade mats, mangrove seedlings, and spartina grass grown into plants, and a large network of volunteers to build mats and grow and care for plants. Also, the media were integral to getting the word out about volunteer opportunities. We had half a dozen events that targeted different sites to deploy oyster mats, spartina grass, and mangrove plants. Local schools were integrated into the project, and school children adopted, cared for, and grew plants. At events, families, students, and volunteers showed up in force to help deploy oyster mats and plant mangroves and spartina grass. Nearly 2,000 oyster mats and 1,000 plants were deployed at Turtle Mound, Castle Windy, and Seminole Rest mound sites. School groups enjoyed volunteering their time and being part of helping to preserve these archaeological sites. Various volunteers and partners, including University of Central Florida, NOAA, the Nature Conservancy, Brevard Zoo, and Indian River Lagoon Estuarine Program were instrumental in helping to build shorelines. We reached numerous visitors and engaged people of all age groups to participate in restoration while providing an educational message about climate change, civic engagement, and stewardship of cultural resources. We also invited the public to participate in numerous Archaeology Day events, which were held at the same time and place that stabilization events were held. This allowed for cross-pollination of interests and allowed for volunteers to have a deeper understanding of what they were helping to protect by participating firsthand in archaeological excavations. Most importantly, our message to the public was the importance of stewardship and science for understanding climate change and sea level rise, for using archaeology to understand past human behavior and paleo-ecological change, and for monitoring and protecting cultural and natural resources. A few extras that developed out of this project was that we hosted a climate change intern at Florida State University's Center for Oceanographic and Atmospheric Prediction Studies. We produced a children's book called We Will Remember Turtle Mound, and I did bring a bunch of copies. And we also produced a climate change brochure for Canaveral National Seashore. In conclusion, to date, 721 meters of highly eroded shoreline adjacent to these mounds have been stabilized. This includes restoring native habitat and creating a living shoreline by deploying oyster shell bags or attached to mesh and planting marsh cordgrass and red and black mangroves. Each erosion has been reduced, and we have successful plant retention, plant growth, and increases in plant density at all locations. Key to the success of this project was heavy civic engagement, including some 5,000 community volunteers who contributed some 11,000 hours to building living shorelines and participating in archaeology. This project was a success by combining natural and cultural resource protection, leveraging strategic partnerships, engaging community partners, communication through media and outreach products, and integrating cutting-edge science. So thank you, and thank you to FPAN. Appreciate it.